All right. Hello, Dr. Sahm. Welcome to our virtual newsroom. Thank you so much for making the time to be here with us. So before we start, can I invite you to introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, what you do, and what are some of your current projects?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me for this conversation today. I really appreciate it. So I am a macroeconomist by training. I started at the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. in 2007. So my first decade studying the macroeconomy went through the financial crisis, the Great Recession, the slow recovery, and I was point on consumer spending. So thinking about households, how they use fiscal stimulus, how they react to income. So just everything you can imagine that households do. It was my job with other colleagues to report to the Federal Open Market Committee, to Fed officials on what's going on in the economy and where do we think it's going. So that I did for over a decade, or I was on the staff forecast for a decade. Then I was a section chief for a research group in another part of the board that really focused on households, and particularly low and moderate income households. And then at the end of 2019, I left the Fed and went to a nonprofit think tank because I wanted to do advising of Congress on how to construct and implement fiscal policy to help families. And you can't do that while you're a Fed economist. You don't get to go advise Congress. So that's been my last year. I've worked a lot on various fiscal programs. I think we'll probably talk about some of those. And I've been very busy in the COVID crisis,
I can totally understand. And you have a rule named after you. Not many economists have that honor. It's like having a math theorem named after you. So can you introduce us to the Sahm rule? What is this about and why is it important and such an elegant way to describe and predict the economy?
Yeah, so first of all, I did not name it the Sahm rule. I'm totally honored that my name got attached to it. Where I developed it was in a proposal about making payments to people, these stimulus checks, automatic in recessions. And then in a severe recession, continuing them. I had done a lot of research on how to help families in recessions and recoveries. I firmly believe these stimulus checks held up with the evidence. And I want to make them automatic. So increase what we refer to as automatic stabilizers. So policies Congress passes ahead of time, and then they just hit go, and they phase out depending on economic conditions. So, but to have this proposal be something Congress could act on, I needed to have a way to say we're in a recession. And so the Sahm rule is simply a recession indicator. It tells us that we are in a recession. It has historically triggered or turned on within months of the start of a recession, which is months and months ahead of when official recession pronouncements are made. It's ahead of typical indicators like 2 declines in quarterly GDP. So it's fast moving and it's very accurate. This is important if you're going to tell Congress to send out hundreds of billions of dollars. So what is it? So the Sahm rule is really pretty simple. So I look at the national unemployment rate for the United States. I take a 3-month moving average. And I do that simply because data can have bumps and wiggles. And again, you don't want to send out billions and billions of dollars on like, oops, it wasn't, wasn't really rising. So I take this 3-month moving average. I compare the most recent month to the low of that series over the prior 12 months. If there's an increase of 0.5 percentage point or more, we're in a recession. So very small changes in the unemployment rate are a sign we're in a recession. Typically, in all recessions, but this one, it takes a while for unemployment to rise. It can take months, even a year to be at peak unemployment. And so it's really important that we not wait until a year into the recession, that we get going right away. So that was the recession indicator. It's based off labor market conditions. People losing their job is why we hate recessions and fight them. And it's widely followed and easy to explain. And so the Sahm rule.
So the Sahm rule, yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned this relationship between unemployment and recession. I think it was last Friday when we saw the Department of Labor job report. The number took a lot of people by surprise. The private sector only added 6,000 jobs And that's barely enough to register against the millions of jobs lost during the pandemic. So to get us started, can you help us understand the severity of the economic crisis we are experiencing right now? And when do you expect the economy to be back to normal, so to speak? And what does the timeline depend on?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. What I use right now to focus our minds on how severe this crisis is and remains is that we know that the U.S. economy is 10 million jobs short of where it was before COVID. That is the largest shortfall since the Great Depression. Like at the depths of the Great Recession over a decade ago, we never saw numbers like that. Now, it is true that the hole, like we have been climbing out of the hole over this crisis. At its worst, we had lost 20 million jobs in the United States. So this is an enormous amount of missing workers, right? And we, in my opinion, are not back. We cannot say mission accomplished until we have those jobs back. And then some. The US economy should always be growing, adding jobs. 10 million jobs are a lot. And we need more support from the government, more fiscal relief, like Congress is talking about almost another $2 trillion in spending. When they did that last spring, that's how we started climbing out of that hole. Not entire, that's not all of it, but that was very important. So we need more fiscal stimulus. There's more that the Federal Reserve can do, particularly as the recovery goes on, not to get in its way. And without that, it will take years to get those jobs back. Even now that, forecasters, it really looks like the $2 trillion is coming in the next relief package. And estimates are, even with that, it probably will take until the middle of 2022 until we have those 10 million jobs back, right? And if we don't have the relief, it's on into 2023. So if you think about, the US economy was in a great place. Relatively speaking, unemployment had been under 4% for a year. It was 3.5% in February of 2020. The idea that it will take us 2 years, 3 years to get back on track, like that's an immense amount of suffering, and it's a big problem. And everything that we can do right now to get us out of that hole faster is better.
I see. So, as you mentioned, you are a great supporter of direct checks. And I think, most mainstream economists would agree that during a recession, fiscal policy plays an important role. But I've also heard different proposals of fiscal support programs like tax credits, extension of unemployment insurance, among various other programs. So compared with those policies, what's the strength of direct checks? Why is it so important to get the money directly to the hands of the people who are suffering?
Right. So first of all, I want to say that I am an and both policy advocate. I don't just want checks. I want extra money for the unemployed. I want money for state and local governments, fight the pandemic, help the schools reopen. So the list goes on and on. That's why we're talking about $2 trillion. The direct payments to families, these stimulus checks in this round, they are set to be $1,400. It's huge, topping off the $600 that people got starting in December. So that in the CARES Act, $1,200 checks went out. So we're talking about big money to families. And yet that piece of the relief package is about a quarter of it. Right. And you see roughly equal amounts going to the unemployed and to state and local governments. So I think that's really appropriate, both top down as a macroeconomist. I want to see big numbers, like trillions with an S. Now, as someone who thinks a lot about families and communities, I want to see bottom up that all these groups that we know are suffering get the support, the lifeline that they need until we have the virus under control and we are starting to go back to life as it was. So I think both are really important. You are correct that there has been a robust debate about what should be in that relief package, how big it should be, and the checks. So they're really popular. Like they've been in every single discussion of relief. We've used them time and again in recessions. I mean, this is broad-based support to families is something that we have done, Congress has done, the American people like it, we all like money in our bank accounts, and they're really easy to understand, and they don't have people don't complain about, well, my neighbor got one and I didn't, as with jobless benefits. You don't talk about red states and blue states, like get into the politics of communities. It's just everybody gets one. So they end up really taking a lot of the attention in the stimulus debates, which I'm fine with. I think they're great. Now, it is the case that as we've gone into this recovery, remember we were 20 million jobs short, and now we're 10, that some economists and some policymakers make the case that we shouldn't be giving bigger checks to just as many people. That we're at a point where we could, as they call it, target the checks to lower income families. Now, to be clear, and I think this gets lost in the discussion, these checks were always targeted. About 80% of the US population, women, men, and children, got a full $1,200 check. There was about another 10% that got a little bit, but I don't want to focus on people with $10 checks, right? So about 80% of the population got the $1,200. That would be exactly the same if they said, okay, now it's $1,400, just like before. The discussion has been to lower the top income for a full check from $75,000 an adult to $50,000 an adult. And if you do that, you go now to 70% of the population who will get the top up to $2,000. And that loses about 40 million people. So that's 40 million people who said they were going to get the $2,000 check and they're not getting it. And the cost savings is not huge, but again, in terms of bipartisan support, the Republicans in Congress think the price tag of the 1.9 trillion is too much. And so if the Democrats wanted to move in that direction, they need to bring down the price tag, not just of the checks, but of all the pieces. The checks have been the focus of the debate because I think that there's a lot of economists that say don't target it. I have many reasons, if you want to hear more about them, why I think that's a mistaken conclusion, but it's a reasonable policy discussion to have.
I see. So, speaking of this, how well targeted those checks are there sort of ex post ways to adjust, like, via, I don't know, tax credit, via other measures, like next year around, we can use those ex post measures to sort of fine tune the checks that we gave out earlier?
Yeah, so I am big on simplicity, right? We need to make this transparent. The checks are popular because it's easy to explain. As long as you're not high income, you're going to get this money. If you start to claw it back in terms of you file your taxes and it turns out your income went up in 2020 and not down, we'll take some of it back. Well, people have already spent the money. And, I guess a broader point is we could have a discussion about exactly who we think should get the checks. And frankly, by the research, income is not a great targeting. But say you wanted to, it makes sense, right? We could, outside of a recession, as I talked about in my proposal, sit down, think hard about exactly who should get checks. Do we want to claw it back? Do we not want to? Do we want to put it with other policies? Right? We could have this discussion, commit to doing it, and then we don't have to rush around in the moment, hash out details. And frankly, Congress is wasting a lot of time that they could be spending on fighting COVID, which is unique to this recession. In every recession, we send out checks. Why are we having this discussion again? Just do what we did. But I think that's where thinking ahead of time in a quiet moment about what we want to do would help a lot. And there are infinite possibilities of how to structure the checks.
Right. And, as a Fed economist, you had extensive research on sort of the effectiveness of various programs. And so I just wanted to ask you, you've studied the 2008 financial crisis. What are some of the empirical lessons we learned from there, and how did your research sort of guide your thinking this time around?
Yeah, so I had a unique opportunity to both watch the data come in, right? As someone who covered consumer spending for the Fed, as soon as programs were announced, I'd have to sit down and model what's the effect on consumption, what's the pattern. And then as the data came in on consumption, I had to look at it with supervisors who were looking with me and be like, did your effects make sense? Or do you need to adjust them? No researcher has that kind of, I made a prediction, now I have to check it against the data and I revise my prediction. So you learn a lot that way. And then at the same time, I had the opportunity to do academic style research on the 2008 stimulus checks, the 2009-2010 Making Work Pay tax credit, the 11 and 12 payroll tax cuts. So those were 3 programs, went to a very large number of households in the United States. And I was using the same method with co-authors Matthew Shapiro and Joel Slemrod, who before that studied the 2001. I mean, we have decades of experience with this. We use the same methods. And it was from that research that led me to conclude the checks, as opposed to tax credits, are the way to do this. And along the way, both for doing my research and advising the Federal Reserve, I had to consume and critically evaluate every single paper written about how households use fiscal stimulus. And the bar was high because I was going to apply it to staff thinking that went to the FOMC, right? So I couldn't just bring my research. I couldn't just bring the ones I liked. I had to bring all of it.
Right. So it's interesting, as you mentioned, sort of economists working together and also economists debating among each other. Recently, on this stimulus check, there has been a very heated discussion among very prestigious economists on the sort of the potential inflationary pressure initiated by the stimulus plan, famously between Larry Summers and Paul Krugman. I think we both follow that discussion. So can you tell us a little more about the potential inflationary pressure initiated by the rescue plan? Is that a real threat? How do we think about the danger of overheating the economy at this point?
Right. So again, as a forecaster at the Federal Reserve, what we gave to the Fed officials as our forecast was what we thought was the most likely path for the economy. Now, every time we sat down and we debated it, we had meetings, we would talk about, well, here's an upside risk. Here's something that could turn out better than we expected. And here's a downside risk. This could be worse. And we would come up with as many of those risks as we thought were things that Fed officials should think about. And then we sat down and we said, what's most likely? Are the risks weighted to the upside? Like on balance, like if something's going to happen, it's probably going to be good. Or are they weighted to the downside? Right? This is very important. Larry Summers is painting the picture of a downside risk. This $2 trillion stimulus package, it's too large. The checks in particular are going to cause people to save and then spend, and then there'll be inflation. I mean, like there's a narrative here. I could imagine my colleagues back at the Fed having this discussion without Larry Summers bringing it up about this was a potential. And yet, we should also be talking about what the opposite of overheating, like an underbaked economy, which is what we've seen in the past. I think Janet Yellen, who's now the Secretary of the Treasury, has been, I think, the most vocal from the administration saying, Larry, I hear you. It's a risk. But the bigger risk is if we do too little. And she has been very firm in the $2 trillion is the right amount. The balance of this package in terms of who gets the relief makes sense. And we're going to follow it up with more, right? This is a relief package. This is about getting us out of the hole. The next step, and this was very much in Biden's campaign proposals before COVID came back with a vengeance in the winter and the recession deepened, he wants to build back better. So on train after this is a $2 to $4 trillion infrastructure spending project. Right. And so that's like a 1-2 punch of up to $6 trillion. Right. Like that's real money. I think the two go together. I think Janet Yellen has articulated another in the administration. It's fine to have a discussion, but again, it needs to be balanced. Larry Summers is not presenting, in my mind, a balanced discussion, and he has sucked the air out of a lot of other debates. And we've seen other prestigious economists. I mean, Raj Chetty has come out with a piece critical of the $1,400 checks going to upper middle class families. So I think it's important to have these debates. I am deeply concerned about how a few individuals can just like hijack the whole debate. And all of policy making takes a lot of time. I would much rather we talk about the vaccination programs and how to get money out for those efforts and not talk about something that could happen in 2 or 3 years that we haven't seen in decades. But that's what economists do, So.
We debate a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the Rocchetti study on sort of the, the asymmetric impact on consumption for the rich and for the poor, which I thought was fascinating. And also, so I read about this debate on this concept called MPC, marginal propensity to consume. The idea is that, well, we want to think about bang for the buck, right? So if you put in $1 in stimulus check, how much of it is actually consumed versus saved versus, used to sort of draw down debt. And that seems a valid argument. So I also read there's a Fed study basically finding that a third of lump sum payments to the households are put into savings. Another a third of it was used to pay down debts. So, the actual consumption multiplier is around 30% or a third. So I wonder if stimulus checks are not used right away, are they still helpful in boosting the economy? Is MPC an interesting concept that we should be focusing on?
Right. So this idea of a marginal propensity to consume, it's simply if I give you an extra dollar, particularly in a rough economic time like now, how much of that dollar do you spend? And the more of it you spend, well, the business owner you spent it at, they make some profit. They can bring back some of their employees. Those employees then spend money. So we want in a stimulate the economy, get the economy going sense, we would like the highest marginal propensity to consume as possible because it kicks off this positive dynamic, which is referred to as the fiscal multiplier. Like we have all kinds of jargon for things that are pretty simple, a positive, oomph going to the economies, but the multipliers. Okay, so that question of what is the marginal propensity to consume out of fiscal relief, in particular stimulus checks, is a discussion that has happened with high quality research since the 2001 tax cuts or the tax rebates, the stimulus checks, 2001, 2008. We have research, and I've been working on a more critical evaluation of this because it's like, I know this research because I've had to study it for over a decade. People shouldn't just take my word when I say income is not the right way to target. I'm going to write it down and, compare studies. But if you look in particular at 2008, we have very high quality studies using different data, using different methods, coming from different researchers, all of which is important. They are peer reviewed and highly published, right? And one thing that is clear when you look at this research, often, not always, researchers will find that low-income households, say earning below $35,000, will spend more than high-income families. In both cases, the point estimate, or what comes out of the regression, they're big, sometimes over 1, sometimes 70%. Now, the thing that is important, and this is where experts and economists like myself have a burden to go past the abstract, past the summary that the authors give, and look at the tables, look at the details. And one thing that I have been deeply disconcerted by, and this started with the Chetty analysis, is that we as researchers know that anytime we work with data and look at relationships, there's measurement error. There's uncertainty. We don't ever know the truth. We don't go around to every single person in the United States and look inside their bank accounts, right? That would be surveillance and bad, right? So we have surveys. Surveys have some error. Some surveys are better. Data are better than others. In any case, when you go into these studies, the results by income are imprecise. Statistically, you cannot say that they are different. Okay, once we know that, we have to stop with the low income spend more than high income because we don't know that. It's intuitive. On average, we know that low income people have less savings, so they are on average spending more, but giving people $1 just out of the blue is different than paying them more or less year after year. Right. So in this really highly published, vetted research, we don't see this pattern. Now, if you go forward to 2020, we have a lot of studies out there, including my own, that are preliminary. They're, again, different data sets. I think now, as with the Chetty paper, there's a lot more people using private sector data. The problem with that is no one else can review them except the authors. And some of them were constructed, as with Chetty, last March or in this year. So they're really, it's not just they aren't vetted, they haven't been tested. But I like to get all the information that's out there, sift through it. What is unfortunate is if one person, by virtue of, having a big name, a great appointment, if they are able to drive the conversation, then that is a problem. It should be all of this, and it should be weighed in comparison to prior research. In any case, once again, and I think even more egregiously, and this is true in the Chetty paper, and it shows up in the Chicago Fed paper too, we're not having a big discussion about how much error, how much uncertainty. And frankly, even as an expert, I have a hard time assessing it because they're underlying data sets. I have no idea. Like, I mean, these are just, you have to make a lot of decisions. And so I find it, and the Chicago Fed team has not done this, but Chetty's team, not only did they report results on one page, nice little pretty page without a lot of, information, no standard errors, but they ended it with a very strong policy argument of don't give checks to people making over $78,000. It'll be a waste of resources. And to me, and I've written about this, and there's more coming, that really hurt, because that, as economists, as policy advisors, that's a degree of precision that they don't have. And like, if you're at odds with decades of research, you ought to be a little more careful. But like, policymakers are going to make the decision. At the end of the day, this is not about Raj Chetty's study. This is about, is $1.9 trillion too much money or not? Like, this is politics. Economists just kind of fly around and throw numbers in, and we can be helpful, but like, none of us make the decision.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so sort of looking beyond the current crisis a little bit, I also wanted to get your diagnosis on the general health of the U.S. economy. And when we talk about sort of the problems facing the U.S. economy in the next 10 to 20 years, there are two problems I frequently hear. First is this national debt problem, and second is this problem of inequality. So I sort of wanted to get your diagnosis and your takes on those two big problems. If policy plays a role here, what are some of the economic initiatives, long-term initiatives we should be thinking about at this point?
Yeah, so first, in terms of the federal debt, this is a conversation about how much money can Congress spend. I mean, this is taxpayer money. How much money can we put out there before it becomes unsustainable? And what that would mean is that, the U.S. government has no trouble selling Treasury debt. Like, U.S. debt is worth something, but we have to repay it in terms of, not only that we repay it in full, but we have to what's called service the debt. Like, there are interest payments. Just like when you have a mortgage, you have to pay back a little bit every month, and largely you're just paying the interest. So that we do have to keep paying the interest. The United States has never defaulted in terms of its payments. This would be very bad. The U.S. is in a very privileged position because we have been a strong economy. We have been able to service our debt. There are other countries in the world that do not have that ability to borrow their way out of a crisis. The privilege the United States has is not God-given, right? Like, we are a go-to, relatively safe asset. And that's why when there are financial disruptions around the world, as we've experienced in COVID, people want to take money and put it in safe assets. U.S. Treasuries are like the asset. And that's true in crisis or out of crisis, right? So, but that means if there's a lot of demand for U.S. Treasuries and the supply is fixed, even if Congress is like wanting to borrow more, the interest rates are low. Interest rates on U.S. 10-year Treasuries have trended down for decades. Now, they could rise again. This is possible. And this is where the overheating debate, people like Larry Summers, Olivier Blanchard will say, well, but if we take all this debt, we do have to service it. It could rise. Interest rates could rise. Yes, they could. We could overturn 30 years of declines. But again, it's a risk. A bigger risk is not taking advantage of the privileged position the United States has to spend big right now, get the growth of the economy going. Like, if we become a circus and can't, productivity falls, growth falls, the rest of the world is going to look at us and be like, yeah, maybe we'll go borrow somebody else's debt, right? So again, this has been a long-standing debate. I think this is one where, in context, just like overheating, we have to remember that for years and years, economists and policymakers have been like, oh, can't borrow. And this happened after the Great Recession, or in the Great Recession, debt, right? And Congress actually started cutting back to lower the debt when we were early in the recovery from the Great Recession, and we paid for that for a very long time. This is bad, and it segues into your other trend that you asked about, inequality. What happened after, the Great Recession, so we had a housing crisis, right? There was a large drop in house prices. Many families, moderate middle income all the way up, own homes, have housing. So house prices hit people. They particularly hit people with less income because they had taken on more debt, sometimes debt that was not sold to them with the expectation they would repay, so like subprime. In any case, what we saw early in the recession was a massive decline in wealth. And high-income people in the financial crisis, their stock portfolio, there was like a big drop in wealth. Over the years after that, and again, remember, we had less of a fiscal support than we normally have in recessions and recoveries. What we saw can be referred to as a wealthless recovery. So middle-class families, not even lower income families, but middle-class families did not recover the wealth that they had had before the financial crisis until 2018, right? Whereas higher income individuals within a few years were back on track, right? They, had stock prices went up, some of this contributed by monetary policy, and they still had their homes, so they benefited from house prices recovering. You cannot benefit from an increase in asset prices if you do not hold the asset, right? And so what we saw is an even bigger opening up of wealth inequality, and because the recovery overall, in terms of the labor market, took so long, we also saw lower income families, middle-class families whose primary source of income is from work, they suffered too. And so in a lot of respects, the lesson we should have learned, the lesson that many people, but not all, have learned from the Great Recession is if you do not do as much as you can, the federal government in terms of fiscal, the Fed in terms of supporting the economy, if you don't do everything you can early on, you will pay for it for decades. And the pain will not be equal across everyone. It will hurt the people who are hardest hit even before the crisis happened.
I see. Interesting. So, final question of the day.
Okay.
When you are not wearing your academic economist hat, you're also a very vocal advocate for diversity of the field. And I think you recently wrote a sharp critique of the economic field to Janet Yellen, to Ben Bernanke, among others. And the title of that critique is called "Economics is a Disgrace." So can you tell us a little more about the problem of the field and what will be at stake if women, people of color, and non-elites are excluded from the kind of policy discussions that we are having right now?
Yeah, no, and first I want to say the conversation we've been having about economic policy connects directly to the advocacy I have done of more diversity and inclusion. Right. One of the things being at the Federal Reserve, and I started right before the crisis got going, and I was there early in the recovery, and I watched us miss the boat. And I was like, this is so straight. My colleagues are so smart. They care so much about their job. How are we missing this? And the conclusion I came to, and this is one that over time you can hear Janet Yellen speak about too, is we were too much of a closed system. We all learned the same models. Many of us had very similar life experiences. There were a lot of men. The women were white. I mean, like we just didn't, and yet we had a crisis that was hitting communities of color, people in rural areas, less educated. I mean, it was affecting all the kinds of people that we are not, right? And it's not like, I mean, I care deeply, and in my research and my work, I think about marginalized communities. This is how I think about, what's mission accomplished. And yet, I cannot live those experiences, right? And as much as I can want to bring those people into, the room when policymaking is being done, it would be a lot more effective if they literally were in the room. And to me, like these scholars, these perspectives are out there. Like, I think we need to build more of a pipeline. We need to bring more early career people in, more diverse. We need to include them. And yet we have many scholars, many people who understand policy that are with us already. And yet, mainstream economics, the staff at these large policymaking institutions, they don't bring them in. And if they bring them in, they often don't listen to them, right? So to me, this like the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion is adversely affecting the advice we give. Now, the reason for, first I wrote a letter to Ben and Janet and Peter. They are the leaders of the American Economics Association, right? I kind of treat Ben and Janet like the grandfather and grandmother of economics, which is not fair, but like I worked for them at the Fed and I feel like I take my problems to you and you will solve them. And of course they said, Claudia, we can't, like, we don't have magic wands either. And so after more frustration, and particularly in the advising I do of early career people, I've been outspoken for a while about our problems, and that means people who are hurting or have friends who have been hurt come to me. And I had a very bad week of advising in this regard, and I finally was like, I am tired of helping people put themselves back together again. That hard work falls on the people who have been hurt themselves. Why don't we stop hurting people? And so the letter that I had written privately turned into a blog post that tens of thousands of people have read now. And the thing that was different about that post, unlike the blogging I'd done at Macro Mom for 3 years, right? This was not new. People knew I was like worked up about this. I named names. And the post was very specifically aimed at leaders in the profession. Not because they're the only people who need to work on it. I need to work on diversity and inclusion too, but they're very prominent examples, and they have been in the room when policy decisions have been made that affect millions and millions of Americans. And frankly, some of their decisions affect the entire global community because of the United States position in the world. And so, yeah. Now, if you look at that post, names that we've been discussing in terms of overheating, like Larry Summers in that post, Olivier Blanchard is in that post, Janet Yellen is there too, right? Like the people who are like so prominent right now in terms of the debate, they're in that post. And the big leaders in macro, and this is a frustration of mine, they're more mature white men. And they bring models that have been in economics for decades. And to me, like, I don't mind listening to Larry Summers. I listen to everything he says and I think about it. The man has decades of experience. And yet I don't want to just listen to Larry and a bunch of people that look like him. And I know, and this is what the blog post had described, that it's not an accident. Like if we don't bring people in, if we don't encourage them, give them the tools and the voice they need to succeed, nothing will change. So I gave some voice. It's not something I would encourage early career people to do, and I have paid dearly for it. But I don't really, I care, and it's a sad statement about economics, but nothing changes unless people say, this must change. Anyway, so yeah, I've stayed busy. I'm fighting crusades on multiple fronts, and yet it's, not everyone believes this, but in my heart, they are totally related. And even though I'm kind of grumpy about it, I'm a macroeconomist, I'm grumpy about everything, like change is happening. It's slow, it's frustrating because not everyone wants change, but like early career people I talk to, marginalized economists who are finally getting a toehold, like they get it. So it's very exciting to see it happen. It's unfortunate that it hadn't really gotten momentum before the COVID crisis because we're replaying a lot of those weaknesses of economics again. So better luck next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's such a fascinating conversation. Such a great time to talk to you.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Bye, Claudia.
Okay. Yep.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Yes.